Hi everyone, it's Vanessa. Welcome to my channel Split Reads, and today I'm here with a very exciting video, and that's to wrap up my reading in 2025. I wanted to do kind of like a year in review kind of summary of what happened, answer some questions, and tell you every single book that I read this year. I have one more video coming regarding all of this, which is like my official list of my favorite books that I read in 2025. So you might get like a little bit of a spoiler for that video in this video, but that video is coming soon. My first question to myself is how many books did I end up reading in 2025? I ended up reading 105 books, which it was something that I was really hoping that I would be able to do. I did have a harder time in 2023 and 2024 getting to that goal. I feel like my reading is on a much better trajectory now, and I'm very optimistic of what 2026 will hold, that I think I will climb even higher than that.
The next question is, how many pages did I end up reading?
I barely almost made it to 30,000. Goodreads says that I read 29,982 and Storygraph says that I read 29,693. So we'll call it almost 30,000. In the month of December, I really saw that I was so close to that 30,000 page mark, and I was like, maybe I could do that in December. And I didn't make it there, but that's okay. Then I also wanted to look into how all of my reading kind of stacked up in all the categories that mostly Storygraph does. I ended up reading 53% fiction and 47% nonfiction, which is a really good number for me. Storygraph said that I mostly read medium-paced books, which I can say that I agree with. I ended up being at 66% of my books being medium-paced, 29% of my books being fast-paced, and only 5% of my books being slow-paced. Most of my books were emotional, reflective, or informative, which I think is so indicative of who I am as a reader. Those words like really describe me as a reader and what I'm looking for in the books that I read. Then the next ranking was kind of hopeful books, sad books, dark books, and challenging books, which I think also really describe me as a reader. I always have like interesting conversations about this with people that I know who read like way different than me, really like to have a fluffy time or like enjoy themselves. Like that's what they look for in their books, is to feel happiness and to feel, I don't know, like joy of rooting for characters or like romance stories like that. And I'm like, the darker the better. So yeah, that's me as a reader.
Oh, you're asking yourself, what exactly did you read, Vanessa? Here's every month of the year and what I read during each month. In January, I read 9 books. Definitely my favorite book from this pile was Annie Bot by Sierra Greer. In February, I had a fantastic reading month with 2 of my favorite reads being Rental House and Girl Juice. I also found my time really valuable with Rejection and Woman Life Freedom. March looks a little scary with 18 books, but that's because of middle grade March. My 2 favorite books from this month were All the Blues in the Sky and Felix Powell, Boy Dog. In April, I was back on my nonfiction. My favorite reads from this month were The Devil at His Elbow, Gaithias, and To Those Who Have Confused You to Be a Person. In May, I continued reading for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction, though my best read of the month was definitely Alligator Tears by Edgar Gomez, a memoir and essays. I was also really surprised by a couple other books like Ugliness, Chlorine Sky, and how good of a follow-up Outsider Kids was. Then I hit a good slump in June and July, and I ended up reading not that many books, but I did read good things. I enjoyed Dolly Alderton's Good Material, which had been on my anticipated reading list, as well as Sunrise on the Reaping and The Trouble with Heroes. Memoir and essays is definitely the thing of 2025. If I can say anything about my reading, is that that is what worked for me the best this year. And you didn't hear this from me, as well as American Bulk were really amazing reads. One of my favorite 5-star reads of the year is There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America. An amazing feat looking at what it's like to be homeless and working in an American city, this one focusing specifically on Atlanta. In August, I read some strange books, and not all with great success, but I did enjoy my time with Hit Girls and Visitations. I thought Waiting for Britney Spears was an interesting take on a weird nonfiction way of writing. And Little Bosses Everywhere. Ugh. The best books that I read in September were Penance by Eliza Clark and Death in the Jungle by Candace Fleming. In October, I read a really hyped book like Wild Dark Shore, and I thought that it mostly lived up to the hype. I also read another amazing narrative nonfiction book, Words of the State, and this focuses on the foster care to prison pipeline. And I also read Never Again Will I Visit Auschwitz, which was really good. Semi Well Adjusted was a memoir from a former Disney kid. And I did try to read in Spanish this month. As you can see, I read La Mariposa by Francisco Jimenez. Such Great Heights really exceeded my expectations and was kind of surprising, and Heart the Lover by Lily King was kind of disappointing and did not meet my expectations because of how anticipated it was. In my household, we are Lily King stans. Unmask Alice and the Carpool Detectives were both like middling nonfiction books, which is really interesting to find because oftentimes I feel like nonfiction is either really good or like not that good, and these were kind of in the middle, and I found that experience really interesting to read from. I finally was excited again by another Megan Wagner Lloyd book, Winging It. I didn't really enjoy her last book. Last but not least, I had a great December reading month because I read Misbehaving at the Crossroads by Honorée Fanonne Jeffers. A 5-star read. The last book that I read in the whole year ended up being a 5-star, so yay. It's another memoir and essays. It's essays and writing, so again, this is like the thing this year for me. I thought Deep Cuts was going to be better than it was. I thought Enshittification was going to be better than it was. And the reappearance of Rachel Price really disappointed me. And those are my 105 books.
The next question that I wanted to answer is what of all of these books that I read this year was my favorite in 4 categories: in nonfiction, in fiction, in graphic novels, and in middle grade. I think those are like the main things that I like to read, so I wanted to pick one book from each. And let me tell you, it was hard, especially for the nonfiction one. But I settled on my favorite nonfiction read of the year being Alligator Tears by Edgar Gomez. I read this book over the summertime. I just remember crying when I was pulling weeds from my backyard, like listening to one of the essays on audiobook, and just feeling so like touched by how much he was sharing about his life and his mother. That book is very, very lovely, and it was one of the books of a big group of books this year where I read a lot of memoirs that were in essays form, and it's like something that I've been really delving into and enjoying. My favorite fiction book of the year, which is kind of against the grain of the general public, is Rental House by Weike Wang. I really, really had a fun time with this book. I think the audiobook narrator was fantastic. Her name is Jen Zhao, and yeah, she just like really made every character come to life for me in a way that I feel like I wouldn't have gotten that same feeling reading the actual text. So for that, I really, really enjoyed the story of a couple who are like double income, no kids, they have a dog. They're kind of at that pace in life where they're like grown adults and they are adults with adult parents, and that relationship is interesting sometimes, something that can be relatable for a lot of millennials, I think, and also just like the way that society is kind of happening around them and how their like identity and their professional lives and their personalities kind of affect what's happening with their parents. It has a 3.29 rating on Goodreads, which it's okay. It's okay. My favorite graphic novel of the year was Girl Juice by Benji Nate. Benji Nate is very quickly becoming one of my favorite illustrator and creators in like the graphic works genre. She's just so fantastic. You can see Benji Nate growing in their craft, and I just had such a good time reading this book. It is basically a group of very absurd roommates slash friends. It's like 4 girls, and it's just all of the random things that they get up to in their world. The comedy is ridiculous. There's one main character, Bunny I believe is her name, who has this dog. She just doesn't pay rent. There's like a seance at the end of the book. Bonkers, but so fun and so funny. And my favorite middle grade book of the year is All the Blues in the Sky by Renee Watson. Renee Watson is one of those authors that's like an auto read for me. Anything that she publishes, I'm happy to read. I always feel really wrapped up in the emotion of her stories. They're very profound. They really have a lot to say about the human experience. You really get into the headspace of what's going on with the main character. The main character is dealing with a lot of grief from losing a friend and going through counseling, and she feels like her pain is bigger than everybody else's. Nobody feels what she's feeling. It's just so beautiful. It made me cry. It's a book in verse. It just feels like a very cathartic read to me, and a book that I just closed, I held in my arms, and as tears were rolling down my face. My least favorite books, let's switch it up. I want them to leave my brain. The first one is the reappearance of Rachel Price. I think just like Emily Henry, I am going to be taking a break from anything Holly Jackson. Holly Jackson really did something with Good Girl's Guide to Murder, but everything else that I've read after that has just been not as good. This book was so unbelievable and just hard to suspend belief of so many things. I don't think she writes very good romance chemistry, and I also don't really understand how this main character was like so bratty in a way that was like not funny or someone to root for. Another book that was the least favorite was The Anxious Generation, which I did a whole rant video discussing in my wrap-up a few months back. But yeah, this is a pop science book where it's wanting to make very succinct solutions for a very convoluted and big problem. It was one of those books where I would read parts out loud to my husband in a way where I was like, can you believe what I'm reading here? Just like very strange one-liners and very strange ways of debating and like getting to an argument that I was not on board for most of the arguments here. Another book was Proxy Mom. The story in this book was just strange, and I don't know if it was because it's translated and the translation didn't work out very well considering such a heavy topic of, you know, postpartum depression. I was kind of upset about that book. The last book that was the least favorite is I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying. This is a book where me and this book just did not get along well with the humor. The way that this book is written in a comedic and light tone is a coping mechanism, and I can appreciate that. The author has gone through a lot of hard stuff in her life, but I think reading this book, she belittled her bigger story that she wanted to tell, that she could really connect with readers by masking behind humor. And I think for some people it would work, it just did not work for me. So let's move on to books that could have been better or books that were really disappointing. And again, these aren't books that are like least favorites. They're just books that, just with a few tweaks or like with a better focus or with slightly better writing, could have really done something. One of those is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I don't think that I'm going to be reading the next Sally Rooney for a while. Similar to Holly Jackson and Emily Henry, it's an author that I think I need to take a break from. This book was way too bloated and long and meandering, and I didn't feel like a good sense of the two main characters. I felt like the grief aspects of it weren't really the point of the book, and that was how it was pitched to us. I also have 3 graphic novels that I was kind of disappointed by, and they were actually all teen books. They were all teen graphic novels. Brownstone, because it won for the Youth Media Awards, and I just thought that the story wasn't very good. Just the way that the characters were drawn to, they didn't have a very big range of emotions in the way that they were drawn. I thought that it would be better. Lunar New Year, for the same reason, I thought that it would be better, but mostly because I really appreciate and look up to these authors, creators, illustrators. And the third one is Ready or Not, which has beautiful artwork, beautiful coloring. I'm going to pick up something else by this creator if they make something else. It had all the pieces, like it had great characters who felt very distinct. I just didn't think it stuck the landing at the end. I also had trouble with Pink Slime, which was one of the books I read towards the beginning of the year. I just couldn't understand what was happening. It felt very like apart and away from me. I also thought that A Passionate Mind could have been better, and I was really disappointed by this book. It was not really a book about Mary McLeod Bethune. It was a book about the author and how the author thought of Mary McLeod Bethune and her connection to her town that she grew up in. And last but not least, Mood Machine, which is a book that I was so anticipating, and the writing wasn't good enough for the subject at hand. She kind of moralizes this topic a little bit in ways that I don't think are helpful, and there are a lot of like threads that were kind of repetitive. Okay, moving on. Next is books that exceeded my expectation. Okay, maybe I thought that they would be good, but I didn't think that they would be so great. I picked 4 books for this one. One of them is Such Great Heights, which is a book that I haven't really heard many people talk about, but if you're into music writing and you lived through like the indie rock and indie pop phase of like, I don't know, the late 90s, 2000s into like the mid 2010s. I think that this book had really relatable writing. The way that it was organized and structured was really fascinating. He looked at so many different aspects of indie, indie rock, indie pop, indie rap. It had so many things that kept me with rap attention of wanting to know what was the next chapter going to be about. It had like playlists at the beginning so you can kind of listen to songs to get you in the head space for what was about to be talked about. I just really enjoyed my time with this book, and it just brought me back to that time period. So definitely if you like music and if you kind of grew up with this music, you would like this book. I also was very surprised by how much I liked Annie Bot and the ideas that this book proposed. I'm not a person that really reads that much sci-fi, and so I was taken by surprise by how much I enjoyed it and the messages of this book. I think this book is hard to read, obviously because the main character is like a robot that is gaining sentience, but is not given the rights of a human woman. I think in my original video about this, I said that it would be a really good book club book, and I stand by that. I think you could have so many good discussions about this, about what it means to be a woman today, and I really thought that it was a good one. And then two kids books that exceeded my expectations were Shark Teeth and Outsider Kids. Shark Teeth is a book about 13-ish middle grader standing up to the fact that her mom is not fit to parent her and her two siblings. I think that it was just done in such a deft way where it made space for the things that her mom was going through while also knowing that as a child you deserve better. And I think that the other adults in the book also were portrayed very well. Outsider Kids also, because I didn't think that this follow-up to Parachute Kids was going to be as good as it was. I really enjoyed it, on par with Parachute Kids, and I'm really fascinated by the series. I'm really interested in the next one. I'm really fascinated by how much, I guess, respect and knowing that kids can handle these tough topics, older kids can handle having these very weighty discussions. Thank you, Betty Tang. I also wanted to talk a little bit about my DNFs.
I DNF'd The Ministry of Time at 14% of the way in. I thought it was really kooky in a way that was not working for me. It wasn't really a lot of setup. You were just kind of dropped into the story. And I just knew that the romance was not going to be for me. Off Fours was another one that just didn't work for me. I stopped reading it about 25% of the way in. I thought it was immensely readable, just not something that excited me. I just don't have a good time with Miranda July books. I've come to realize that. Now, The Barn, I didn't anticipate to DNF. I thought this might be one of my favorite nonfiction books of the year, but I DNF'd it around 11% of the way in. I thought it was kind of a mishmash, and it wasn't really focused enough for me, and we kept going back and forth in timelines in a way to set up the premise and the goals of the book. I'm not sure if I'm going to come back to it. It's one of those that I was thinking maybe I will pick up at another point in time. I love Janine Capot-Crusett. I've loved her book, My Time Among the Whites, one of my favorite books of all time. And I thought, it's time for me to pick up her fiction. And this one was getting a little bit of buzz. Say Hello to My Little Friend. The reason why I picked it up is because it's focused in Miami, so it was bringing up touchstones of my childhood. And I thought that it was going to be really captivating. But instead of impersonating Pitbull in the story, the main character's impersonating Tony Montana. And not really super into The Godfather, so I dropped this one about 20%. Kent Stay was another one like The Barn that I had on my TBR for the books that I missed in 2024 that I wanted to read in 2025, and I just thought it was too dry. It was really boring, especially on the audiobook, and I dropped it about 30% of the way through, especially after reading Kent State by Derf Backderf. Julie Chan is Dead is a really polarizing read from what I've seen on BookTube, and I'm one of the people that did not like it. I dropped it about 43% of the way through, so almost halfway. I just thought that the main character was really painful to read from, and it was just too ridiculous for me. It didn't feel like I had a connection to her. I read stuff about what happens later on in the book too, and I am not interested in that. Last but not least, Melissa Losada Oliva's Dreaming of You, which is a novel in verse. I thought would be kind of like an interesting book that's unlike things that I typically read, but I dropped it about 22% of the way through just because I did not know what was happening. It's a cool concept, thinking about Selena and trying to create seances to bring her back, or use that to talk about your life, but it was really meandering and it wasn't grabbing me. And if you really read the reviews for this book, nobody likes this book.
The next question I want to answer is best or favorite writing. I think that so many books that I read had really amazing writing that are going to end up in my best books list. Misbehaving at the Crossroads. Oh man, what a fantastic book. Also a writer with background in poetry, which I think also comes through. Easy, readable, but also so touching and emotional. The Devil at His Elbow. Just because this kind of writing is very different, this writing takes a very, very large problem, issue, crime, something that took many decades to kind of unfold. And somehow Valerie Barlin was able to concisely put it all together so that you understood how this came to be, how this all happened, how A led to B led to C. I think her background as a journalist is very important in that matter, and this really helped me understand fully what happened with the Murdaugh case in South Carolina. Another book that had amazing writing, but didn't have an amazing ending or story in my opinion. Heart the Lover by Lily King. The first half of this book, I just could not stop thinking about these characters because they just felt so real. They came so much off the page in a way that only Lily King can do. One of my favorite adult authors of late, Writers and Lovers, still stands up there as like one of the best books that I've read in like the literary fiction realm. And while Heart the Lover didn't land the ending, in my opinion, I still really love the writing. Two other adult fiction books that I enjoyed the writing include Wild Dark Shore. And while I did enjoy this book and all the things that happened to get us to the end, I even enjoyed the ending. I thought that it fit the story. What I most love about this book was the writing. Though this world is so different from mine, it felt like I could be there. It felt like I was smelling the water from the ocean, and it felt like I was in their little house and seeing all these seeds. It just felt very real. And last but not least was Penance, and this for a very different reason. I think this book just did a really good job at writing ugly teen girl emotions and also like ugly, unreliable narrator author writing about this true crime case. It really felt like I was in 2010's Tumblr all over again. The next question I want to answer is a favorite newly discovered author. Two people. Edgar Gomez, which I talked about. He does have other books, and it's definitely in my mind to read another book by him. He has a book called High Risk Homosexual, which came out in 2022. And the other person who I want to read more from is Honorée Fanonne Jeffers, who also has a fiction book. It's her one and only fiction book, and it's called The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which was actually an Oprah's book club pick in 2021 when it came out, and it's kind of a book that passed me by. The next question I'm answering is books that made you rage or made you despondent, which I think ties back well into my emotional, reflective, informative, sad, dark, challenging books. For sure, a book that made me, probably the book that I had the hardest time reading, gave me nightmares, is Little Bosses Everywhere. While this book wasn't perfect, and I think I ended up rating it 3.5 stars, it definitely made me just realize how much MLMs affect the people who are in charge in our country. And yeah, it made me really, really angry that fraudsters are running our country. Another book that really made me rage and made me like, I don't know, like I had so many conflicting emotions reading it is House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie, who is Ruby and Kevin Frankie's daughter, who was part of the 8 Passengers channel against her will. In the last 2 years, her mother has been charged with child neglect for her 2 youngest siblings, Sherry Frankie's siblings. I think why this book made me so conflicted is because of Sherry's final thoughts on Mormonism and how she was shunned by the church for many things that happened to her that were outside of her control, were things that didn't make her leave the church. It's still so ingrained in her, and she could see so many of the things that affected her family that made Ruby create these life choices professionally, because she couldn't do anything outside of the home except for having 6 children. But she can't like take all of those pieces and realize like how tied that is to her religion. But a very good book. Honestly, I really enjoyed learning her life story, and I hope that she is in a better place. She's definitely someone that is reflective of her own life and wanting to better her life, and took steps to make sure that that was the case. You already knew that I raged and became despondent reading Anxious Generation. But yeah, I literally would like highlight things, not because I wanted to highlight good passages, but because I wanted to highlight passages to then read out loud to people to be like, what do you think about this? And last but not least, Cold Crematorium. This is a book that did make me despondent, reading about the life of the author who was sent to a World War II concentration camp. He went to Auschwitz, but he also went to, I think, Birkenau. The first time that this book has been translated from the original language. It's told in a very journalistic style because he was a journalist. It's just very matter of fact. Like, these were the conditions that we lived in, and it made me very, very, very sad to read that. And then I was like super depressed and told myself I wouldn't read anything else about World War II for a while. Book that made you cry. And I do have 4 books that ended up making me cry this year. All of them but one I've already talked about. All the Blues in the Sky. Definitely cried reading that book. Like, so good. Alligator Tears. Also, you already heard the story of me crying pulling weeds in my backyard. That was mostly the story about his mother's health declining as she got older from all of these service work jobs that she's had, trying to put food on the table as an immigrant woman in Florida. Pretty close to home. Misbehaving at the Crossroads also made me cry. That one was also a mother story that made me cry. The ending of the book is really about the deterioration of her mother's health, and even though she's had a very difficult relationship with her mother over the many decades, Honorée Fanonne Jeffers is in her 60s now, she still needed to be there for her mother. She still loves her mother, and I think that that is so true. of like all of the relationships that we have with people in our families. They're not always perfect, but at the end of the day, like, that's your mommy. And as someone who loves her mommy, that can also like have moments of like confusion or misunderstanding her life choices or like wondering what the future will hold. It was just lovely to hear how she took on that struggle and challenge. And last but not least, a book that I haven't talked about is Woman, Life, Freedom. This book is a collection of illustrated essays, illustrated graphic nonfiction from different creators and illustrators. So every story is something different. Every chapter is something different, which I enjoyed. There are quite a few stories in here that are very hard to read from. It's about revolts and protests that happen in Iran that come and go. You know, women and men who have stood up to protest for something that is right, for a better Iran, knowing that the average folk is the one that is facing detriment from the current regime. Seeing like names to faces of people who have died in protests is just very challenging and sad for me, and that made me cry. And we'll end it off on a lighter note, and that is a book that made you laugh. Okay, 2 books that made me like chuckle and smile and kind of like, what's happening here, is Waiting for Britney Spears, Rejection. Books that I did not like crack up laughing, but I was just like, oh my god, this is ridiculous. Good Material really did make me laugh. This was a really nice comedy, and I feel like so many books that I read that are like comedy based do not work for me, but this one I did really enjoy the humor in it. I also really enjoyed in 2 kids books, Frindle and Felix Powell, Boy Dog. Frindle's an older book and Felix Powell is a brand new book, and both of these books just really came across what it's like to be a kid in such a way that it felt so much like how kids are, that made me laugh and chuckle. And last but not least, a book that really made me laugh is Girl Juice. That book was the funniest thing that I read last year, something that is going to be a highlight that I remember for many, many years to come. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit more about my reading this year, what I ended up reading, what I thought in general about how it went, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video where I talk about my best books of 2025.